Yeah, I'm just gonna be doing like lazy art stream. It's so early. You wanna know what time it is? It's not even 10 p.m. yet. It's not even 10 p.m. And I'm like, that's way too early. What am I supposed to do? Go to sleep? No. So, yeah, I thought I'd just do some art and listen to some stuff. Probably listen to, like true scary stories. Stuff I normally do when I'm like bored and stuff. Why isn't this working? How do you do that? There you go. Yeah, just doing chill stuff. Don't worry. Not doing anything big. It's not big enough. Yeah, that's better. I wish you doing another stream so soon, but on YouTube that you're heading to bed. No, I'm not tired. It's just that I was done doing my stuff I was done my Twitch stuff, so I could do my YouTube stuff. Cause like when I stream on Twitch, I'm just like I always try and stick to one category if I can. But like if I want to switch to another one, then I'll just do it on YouTube. And plus, you know, it's chill. We're just chilling. And besides, it's not like I'm some like master artist, so don't expect like anything too, wow, that's so pretty. It's not. Oh yeah, I gotta put my stuff on. Yeah, I'm not gonna really be like talking too much though. I'm mostly just gonna be listening to, you know, like my stuff. And if you wanna chat, then you go ahead. I'll be looking at chat like once in a while. Let's see how you guys are doing. Mole, why are you confused? I've done this before. Why are you so confused? You act like I've never done this before. Let's change YouTube channels. Where's my stuff? Okay. Shrugging. I don't know. Well, I'm gonna be listening to
I'm
my own
in
true
this
crime
video
stuff,
because
by
I
the
want
way.
to be 100% honest. I am against murder. I think that
I
man
won't be
deserves to
showing it
die.
on
This
stream,
is
though.
Serena Vermeersch, a
But, you know.
small-time YouTuber who had no
I
idea
guess you'll get
that
to see
only
what I
1
do
month
after
after
stream
posting
when
this
I'm not
video would
exhausted.
become a victim of the very thing that she was talking about. At the time, Serena was living in Surrey in British Columbia, but on one
That's
ordinary
where I
evening,
used to live.
and while walking home from school, she all of a sudden disappeared. Tragically, the next day, a body would be found, and what police uncovered left an entire nation furious. And that's because the man responsible for her death wasn't some unknown monster or somebody with a clean track record, but he was actually a formerly convicted offender who had spent most of his adult life behind bars. In fact, this man was such a problem that many officials even saw this coming. So, who precisely was Serena Vermeersch? How did she encounter this evil monster? And how did the system fail her so violently? Welcome back to Coffee House Crime, folks. My name is Adrian, and today we're traveling to Canada to look at a story that still haunts officers to this day. Now, this has to be one of the saddest stories that I've covered here, because there was nothing that Serena could have done. Meanwhile, her killer, well, he gave the authorities plenty of warning. By the way, I post videos here weekly, so if that does sound like your kind of thing, then please do consider subscribing. It really does help the channel out. And now with all of that said, please grab yourself a coffee, get comfortable, and let's caffeinate while we investigate. This is the case of Serena Vermeersch. Welcome to Surrey, British Columbia. Known to be a sprawling suburb which is found just south of Vancouver, Surrey is filled with quiet neighborhoods, family homes, and tree-lined streets. The nights are both calm and quiet here, especially around the neighborhoods and all of the industrial zones which shut down for the evening. However, on the evening of September the 15th, 2014, that calm was suddenly broken when 17-year-old Serena Vermeersch never returned home from school. Now, at first, her mother was not immediately concerned, because Serena was not only a good kid, but she always stayed out of trouble. And so, maybe she had just stayed late with friends to finish homework, or perhaps even missed the bus. However, as the hours passed by, not only were all of her calls left unanswered, but she hadn't been replying to any of her text messages either. The evening dragged on with absolute silence, and by nightfall, her family were extremely concerned, and that is when they decided to call the police. From that moment onwards, Serena was officially reported as missing, and the Surrey RCMP issued a public alert to all nearby residents. By sunrise, Surrey's many streets, parks, and alleyways were all under scrutiny by officers.
There's also concern for another young woman who is missing this morning. Surrey resident Serena Vermeersch was last seen Monday evening boarding a bus at 128th Street and 64th Avenue. The 17-year-old's family is concerned about her health and her well-being.
By now, detectives had learned that Serena was last seen around 8:10 p.m. boarding a bus near 64th Avenue and 128th Street, which is the usual bus route that she would take home before then walking the rest of the journey. They also noted that there was nothing unusual about her plans and that Serena was simply heading home. Of course, the problem is that she never actually made it there, which means that somewhere along that familiar journey, something terrible must have happened. As the hours slipped by, everyone who knew Serena grew more concerned and more anxious. And as it turns out, this wasn't the first hardship her family had experienced either. Following a serious car accident, her father Kevin was now a few months into a coma. Meanwhile, her mother Rumiko was now living every parent's worst nightmare. You see, in a world where a disappearance can lead to so many catastrophic outcomes, every single minute matters when a child goes missing. And so the race to find Serena was on. And the thing is, Serena was not the kind of person to run away either. She was level-headed, kind-hearted, and even a little bit goofy. In fact, she had her own YouTube channel where she liked to be her authentic self. And now, for a bright young girl who loved to talk so much, she was all of a sudden silent. And so, before we travel down this rather dark path, let's first take a look at who Serena actually was. Before any of this happened, Serena was just like any other teen. She was creative, she loved to express herself on her YouTube channel, and was studying at Sullivan Heights Secondary School. She also loved music, hanging out with friends, and posting videos online. At the time, she was running a small YouTube channel under the name of heyyyy, where she uploaded vlogs for fun and spoke about whatever crossed her mind. Looking back, there is quite a lot of down-to-earth content on this channel, which clearly was made back in the day when YouTube was all about the normal person.
Hi guys, it's Rena. So, I'm just getting ready for school and I think I'm a little bit sick. Like, my nose is kind of stuffy and I can't breathe out of my left nose. But yeah, so I just thought I'd make a little video, and I'm actually standing in the bathroom because the lighting in my room is really bad. And my kitty's... Oh, and she got a little bow tie. Look up, look up. Come on, I want to see your bow tie. See? She has a little bow tie. So she looks like Gigi, the cat from Kiki's Delivery Service.
From a hobbies perspective, Serena was into Pokemon, Spider-Man, Magic the Gathering, GTA, and cats. She truly was a real homebody in all of the right ways. Her videos are quite nostalgic to watch actually, probably because they remind me of a simpler time when I too was a teenager, and you have titles like "Oh hi guys" and other phrases that only made sense back then in 2014. With only 100 subscribers in her pocket, Serena was not necessarily chasing fame. She just liked to create videos, to connect with like-minded people, and to make others smile. Her friends described her as warm, funny, and kind, and the sort of person who could light up a classroom. Just to point it out, guys, I know, very common phrase there. They are not my words. Inside the family, Serena was her mother's pride and joy. She was reliable, thoughtful, and was never one to cause trouble or disappear without a word. And of course, that is why, when she didn't come home that Monday night, that everyone panicked.
Yeah, like, I'm completely against murder. But, because, I mean, okay, a lot of murderers, none of them, like, hardly any have ever said they killed someone just because they think it's the right thing to do. They always had a reason, whether it be, like, drugs, or someone owed them money, but never gave it back, or gangs, or all that stuff. They didn't do it because they thought it was the right thing to do. Most of them. I haven't heard of any murderer that said they thought it was the right thing to do by killing someone.
Tragically, on the Tuesday, that being September the 16th of 2014, the search for Serena took an awful turn. Around 24 hours after she had vanished, a search party were busy combing through the industrial area of East Newton, and as one of the searchers peered into a secluded patch of brush, which could be found just off the railway tracks along 146th Street and 66th Avenue, they unfortunately came across a harrowing discovery. It was the body of a young girl, and visual identification was enough to know that this was Serena.
Police have now identified a body found in Surrey. RCMP confirmed 17-year-old Serena Vermeersch was found dead at the City Works yard on 66th Avenue. She was last seen boarding a bus Monday night at 128th Street and 64th Avenue. Her death is suspicious, with an autopsy happening today. Investigators are canvassing the area and would like to speak to a man seen Monday at the railroad tracks at 66th and Highland. He left in a gray or silver pickup truck.
The area in which her body was found was only a few meters away from the usual path that she would take home from school, meaning that whoever had attacked her, well, it was in a place that she knew very well. She was painfully close to where her family thought she would be that night, meaning that, all along, their greatest fears were in fact correct. Now, this area along Upland Road, which is found in the industrial part of town, was dimly lit, thick with undergrowth, and, in stark contrast to the daytime, eerily silent. During work hours, this place is busy with personnel from multiple companies nearby, but obviously, once they all go home in the evening, the entire area is deserted. And, of course, you could argue that it's not the kind of area that any teen should be after dark. Within minutes, police officers flooded the area. Yellow tape stretched across the tracks, and officers could be found surrounding every corner of the railway. And, no surprise, but employees of all of the nearby warehouses were told to stay clear. Soon enough, the RCMP confirmed what everyone had feared, that this was not an accident and, without a doubt, was homicide. The case was quickly handed over to the Integrated Homicide Investigation Team, which is also known as heyyyy, and news stations recorded those officers working late into the night and well into the morning. News of the discovery spread quickly, and Surrey quite simply changed overnight. The hope in finding Serena alive had collapsed into grief, and that grief would soon give way to anger. In fact, entire protests and rallies would soon be initiated, all due to Serena's death. But this is something that we'll talk about later in this video. As forensic teams continued to work at the crime scene, the general public's fear deepened. Of course, the main fear being, what if the killer was to strike again? And all of a sudden, all parents in the area were more cautious about their children. Soon enough, specialists confirmed that, of course, this was homicide, but also that she probably did not know her killer, meaning that this was a random attack. And of course, this statement was comforting to no one, because if this really was a random act of violence, it was more likely that the killer would strike again. And so, on that note, detectives began the slow, methodical process of piecing all the clues together. Because whoever did this to Serena, well, they were still out there. So, what do you do in a situation like this? Well, it all begins with knocking on doors, speaking to residents, and trying to piece together her final movements. And thankfully, a clue would soon emerge. It all began when a nearby resident reported seeing a man who was dressed all in dark clothing walking along the railway tracks only meters from where Serena's body was found. The witness also saw him climbing into a silver Dodge pickup truck which had a canopy and a roof rack before then driving away. Now, not only was this a precise detail, but it also occurred not even 1 hour before Serena's body was found. At this stage of the investigation, the heyyyy had two options. They could either keep this information quiet, or they could go public with it. And I think that they made the right decision here, but they quickly went public, also urging anyone who had seen that truck to come forward.
Back at home, police have a warning for the public as they call the murder of a 17-year-old Surrey girl a random crime of opportunity. The search for Serena Vermeersch's killer is focused on a man driving a silver or gray Dodge pickup truck with a canopy and a roof rack. He was spotted leaving the scene Tuesday night, shortly before the teen was found dead. Serena's body was discovered near train tracks off 66th Avenue in the Newton area.
Thankfully, Surrey can be a busy area even at night, and police knew that somebody must have seen that truck. And they were right, because within a couple of hours, they had received multiple phone calls and tips from the public. At the same time, detectives started pulling surveillance footage from all nearby businesses, hoping that the pickup's headlights might show up somewhere in the grainy footage. Using the same surveillance cameras, they would also retrace the route she had taken that Monday night, and surveillance footage would later confirm that Serena had boarded a bus at 64th and 128th Street around 8:10 p.m. However, after that, her path went dark. Off the back of that, the police appealed to anyone who had shared the same bus with her to come forward, because even the smallest detail, like who she was sat next to or whether she seemed alone, could provide to be crucial. And then, only 5 days after her disappearance, investigators would finally catch a break. It was around 6 a.m. on September the 20th that heyyyy and RCMP would finally make an arrest. The suspect was described as a 43-year-old man from Surrey who was, quote, already known to the police. Now, at first, his name was actually protected under a temporary publication ban. But if you were talking to anybody within the police department, they already knew that they likely had their guy. The man's name was Raymond Lee Casey, and as it turns out, this sack of dirt was no stranger to crime. In fact, he was a repeat violent offender and had a past that was so disturbing that his very presence in society felt less like rehabilitation and more like an error. When news of the arrest broke out, relief did wash over the city, but there would be other feelings that followed. To begin with, it was only 5 days after Serena's death that the police reassured the community that the threat was over, which is great, but the relief would quite quickly sour when people realized who her killer was. It was extremely frustrating to learn that the RCMP's high-risk target team had already been monitoring Raymond before Serena's murder. This means that not only did they know the kind of danger he posed, but also they weren't able to stop him. It was at a press briefing that iHit called Serena's murder a, quote, horrible crime of opportunity. And that phrase would strike a nerve across Canada. Because how was a man like this, who was being monitored daily, even given an opportunity? And if you think that this was all that angered the Canadians, well, think again. Because Raymond's history was about to make the situation a whole lot worse. Now, this man was a walking red flag and a one-man crime spree with a record so long that he practically needed his own library shelf. And would you believe that between the ages of 15 and 38, that being the age that he murdered Serena, he had only spent 2 years out of prison? Genuinely the kind of guy who makes you wonder if evil ever takes a day off, because even in the face of his crimes, he was smug about it. Raymond's criminal history stretches as far back as his teenage years. First jailed at the age of 15, he then spent most of his life behind bars, and for good reason too. In the year of 1991, and at the age of 19, Raymond broke into a museum just after working hours, before then going on to sexually assault one of the workers at knife point. He then forced her into his car, took her to an ATM machine, forced her to withdraw money, and then tied her to a tree in the woods before leaving her for dead. It turns out that the only reason she had survived that night is because nearby farmers had heard her screaming. And then only a few days after that, Raymond then robbed another woman at knife point, pushing her 2-year-old daughter towards traffic in the process. For those crimes alone, Raymond was sentenced to 22 years in prison, which, as it turns out, is one of the longest terms possible at that time. And the crazy thing is, as he was led out of court, he then looked back towards his victims and said, "I'll see you in 22 years." While in prison, Raymond refused every kind of rehabilitation program that was offered to him, instead collecting misconducts for violence as if they were Pokemon cards. He was officially labeled as a high risk to kill or seriously harm other people if ever released. And for this reason, parole boards denied him 8 times throughout the 22 years, describing him as a danger to others and somebody who should not be allowed out in public. In fact, Raymond even admitted this at one point, telling the board that he did not want to be freed because he feared that he would re-offend. By the way, if you look hard enough, you can even find his detention review online. In this report, the board's assessment of risk says, "The board is satisfied that, if released, you are likely to commit an offence causing the death of or serious harm to another person before the expiration of the sentence you are now serving according to law." In fact, in a parole consideration review, which was taken in January of 2013, and literally just 6 months prior to the end of his 22-year sentence, the board still believed that this man was a train wreck of a human being. They stated that, "Your case management team is of the opinion that there has been no change in the risk you present to the community, and in fact, they note that your serious institutional behavior over the past year has had a further negative impact on your case." In reaching its decision, the board notes that since the last detention review, you have not participated in any interventions which would reduce your risk to re-offend, and that you continue to be assessed as a moderate to high risk to re-offend, both violently and sexually. Based on a review of your file, and considering the circumstances set out above, the board continues to find that, if released, you are likely to commit an offence causing serious harm to another person before the expiration of your sentence. Now, with a personality like his, I don't know why he wasn't kept in the slammer forever. I mean, imagine being so inconsistently awful that even your mugshot looks tired of your existence. However, laws are laws, I suppose, and once he had served his full sentence, Canada's judicial system had to let him go. And so, in June of 2013, and after 22 years behind bars, Raymond walked out free, unchanged, unrepentant, and still dangerous. The entire situation is just absolutely mad when you think about it. This man clearly posed a dangerous risk to others, and yet, even still, there was nothing that the law could do to stop him. In fact, the authorities were so alarmed by this that they issued a public warning on the very day he was released. Surrey residents were told that a high-risk offender, who was violent, impulsive, and opportunistic, was now living among them, and it turns out that even the city's mayor, Diane Watts, was furious. For over a year, Raymond lingered in the Surrey area under a Section
Oh shit, that
810
scared
peace
me.
bond, meaning that police officers could monitor him, but
That scared me.
unfortunately not detain him. During that year, he did breach his conditions once, and although he was jailed briefly, he was released immediately.
Thank you so much for
afterwards. The system likes
subscribing.
to call this supervision,
Sorry, I
but
couldn't.
to the rest of us,
What was
we
your
like to
name?
call it gambling. And of course, by September of 2014, those
Sorry, I couldn't
warnings
catch your
had
name
come
in
again full
time, but
circle.
thank you so
The
much for
so-called
subscribing.
rehabilitation experiment had spectacularly failed, and only 15 months after his release, he had done exactly what everyone feared the most. He saw Serena walking home and then took full advantage of her vulnerability. Only a few moments later, she was dead. So, now that we know that Raymond is to blame, what precisely happened? Well, on Monday the 15th of September, Serena attended her school as usual. There was nothing unusual or different here. It was just a regular school day for her. At 8:10 p.m., she is last seen boarding a public bus at the corner of 64th Avenue and 128th Street, where witnesses report that she was heading towards her home in the East Newton area of Surrey. At around 8:30 p.m., and after disembarking the bus near her neighborhood, the walk, which she would do almost every day, takes her along 66th Avenue, where she then needs to cross a set of railway tracks in a dimly lit wooded area. Now, unknown to her, Raymond was waiting for a random target to appear along this dimly lit area. Through chance and random opportunity, the two would unfortunately cross paths. And of course, that unfortunately is when he attacked her. From what we know, he then chased her and cornered her, alluding that she knew there was danger. And it turns out that Serena put up an incredibly good fight against Raymond. At the time, she was armed with an X-Acto knife for self-defense. And although Raymond tragically overpowered her, Serena had dealt such severe injuries to him that he required 22 stitches to close all of them up. And sadly, Serena was then strangled to death by a piece of Raymond's clothing, and about 15 minutes later, he then fled the scene, after concealing her body in the dense underbrush. For reasons unknown, he then stupidly returned to the crime scene the following day, of course being spotted in the process. And only an hour later, Serena's body was found. In the months that followed, prosecutors slowly but surely built their case against Raymond, and I do have to say, it was airtight. I mean, amongst their arsenal, they had forensic evidence, witness reports, matching DNA, and far, far more. And given his violent history, few doubted that Raymond was not responsible. Now, unfortunately, Raymond was not formally charged with first-degree, but second-degree murder instead. And of course, this was a detail that angered many residents. And that's because, in Canada, first-degree murder usually requires proof of planning or aggravating factors.
Yeah.
And so, without concrete evidence of premeditation, prosecutors opted for the more straightforward charge instead. But even still, this was extremely hard to accept. The community wanted the harshest possible sentence. And honestly,
Wait,
I
what
can
year did
understand
this
why.
take place?
For a while, Raymond's identity was even hidden
'Cause
behind
I
a
actually think-
publication ban. But Surrey's residents were already outraged, and put quite simply, they weren't having it. Even the city's mayor, Diane, spoke out about it, tweeting, "Protect the innocent, not the criminal." Thankfully, public pressure worked. The ban was eventually lifted, and when Raymond's name finally hit newspaper headlines, the outrage erupted even more. People realized that this was the very man that the system
There's a
had
comment here
already
that says,
warned
"Today
could really
I
hurt,
and everyone
now they knew
outside
that
Canada
he did.
learned that all
In the 3
Canadians
years
hate
after
Surrey."
Serena's murder,
I don't think I've ever
Raymond
seen this
maintained
much
his plea of
passion
not
against the
guilty.
place.
The
I can
case
respect
was
that.
scheduled to go to trial,
Bruh,
and
that
Serena's
is
family
so
prepared
freaking
themselves
true.
for what
I
would be a
hate
painful
Surrey.
ordeal. But then, all of a sudden, on September the 14th of 2017, something unexpected
I've never heard
happened.
anything more
Just as the
true. I
trial
freaking
was
hate
about to
Surrey. I'm so
begin,
glad I moved from
Raymond
there.
abruptly changed his plea to guilty. It was described as a surprise guilty plea and caught everyone off guard. he likely pleaded guilty simply to avoid the shame and embarrassment in court. Now, under Canadian law, secondary-degree murder carries an automatic life sentence. The only question that was left behind was for the judge to determine how long Raymond would wait until being eligible for parole, which can range from 10 to 25 years under the current system. Now, personally, I really don't think he received enough time here, because in the end, he was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for only 17 years. Not 20 or 22 or 25, but only 17. And so, although it means that Raymond will be in his 60s.
Nah, bruh. In Canada, you could get arrested for like robbing a store, okay? And you could get released in like an hour. That's how much. Yeah.
Before he can even apply for parole. I do genuinely not understand why he wasn't given the maximum sentence. And for Serena's family, there was no true relief either, only the hollow comfort of partial justice. They initially said that there would be no closure until sentencing, but even then, it was clear that the closure that they were looking for was something that this kind of loss would simply never bring. And when the judge read his final words and the guards led Raymond away in shackles, one of the family relatives was heard over saying what everyone else was thinking: lock him up and throw away the key.
In a New Westminster courtroom, 43-year-old Raymond Casey pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. He was charged with killing 17-year-old Serena Vermeesh from Surrey. Her body was found near a set of railroad tracks in the East Newton neighborhood in 2014. Surrey RCMP said her death was a crime of opportunity and described it as a random attack.
And so, with that said, the case of Serena Vermeesh was, at least in a legal sense, closed. However, outside the courtroom, the anger, questions, and disbelief still remained. Once the dust had settled after his sentencing, there was one question that seemed to just keep coming back to the general public. Could this have possibly been preventable? And the thing is, yeah, it really could have. I mean, for example, if the parole board had actually taken its warnings seriously, then of course Serena would still be alive, because Raymond should have never been allowed out in public. And even IHIT, who normally avoid politics like the plague, admitted that this case sparked a fierce debate about what to do with dangerous offenders. And that's putting it lightly. Now, on one hand, I do understand, because when a criminal finishes their sentence, then what can you do? But on the other hand, Raymond was a very clear case. After her death, there were many political discussions about how Canada could prevent this from happening again. But you know what? Too little too late. And I think all of these are just empty words, because all of this happened only after Serena was gone. Experts would later point out that if Raymond had been declared as a dangerous offender back in the 90s, then he would have likely never seen daylight again. And the thing is, they're right, because every document in parole hearing said the exact same thing, that this man was a walking time bomb. And they didn't just miss all the warning signs here, they quite literally wrote them down and then just let him walk out the front door.
That's Canada for you.
To make matters worse, when the RCMP were pressed about the situation, they said that Raymond technically hadn't broken any of his release conditions. However, to the community, that didn't mean much. If anything, it was just an FU back to the public. After Serena's death, there were promises of reform, and the federal government rolled out Bill C-26, that being the tougher penalties for Child Predators Act. There was also talk about longer parole reviews, stricter supervision, and better tools for tracking violent offenders.
Well, let's acknowledge the fact that people, certainly all of us, have a right to be deeply disturbed and angry about what's happened. In terms of the system, we've gone through a phase in the last little while of increasing sentences, increasing punishments, and decreasing an emphasis on treatment and making sure that people get the treatment that they need. We've got all of the pieces that we need in place to make sure that people like Mr. Casey are contained, are watched by police and watched by probation. we need to question what happened with him in terms of treatment and assessment while he was inside.
This is a very rare set of circumstances, a very rare combination of features, an offender with this kind of record and this kind of correctional history. Most people who come out of prison aren't walking time bombs, as this man who is alleged to have committed this crime appears to be.
However, for Serena and the rest of her family, none of that matters because she's gone. If she was alive, she would have graduated high school in 2015, gone to college, and probably gone on to have a happy and fulfilling life. But instead, her community now visits her grave and wonders how it came to this. In the end, Serena's story is just as heartbreaking as it is maddening, because this bright, funny 17-year-old girl who was full of promise was taken by a man who never should have had the chance to ever hurt anyone again. It is no surprise that her death will still hang over every discussion about parole and public safety in Canada, and sadly, maybe that is Serena's legacy. Not the tragedy, but the change that it forced. Surrey has already begun that change, by the way. There is better lighting, more patrols, and more vigilance across the country. And sure, these may all be small steps for now, but in a way, they are born from her story. Indirectly, her death may have saved other lives in the process. That is something that we will never know. Meanwhile, those closest to Serena still remember her not for what happened, but for who she was.
You all, and I hope you have a beautiful day, and I'll make another video when I feel better. So yeah, bye. Mwah. Have a good day, and don't forget to smile.
If Serena's family hadn't suffered enough already, her father, who of course was already in a coma at the time that she died, would also pass away 2 months later. I honestly can't imagine what her family must have gone through in the months and years after. And this is a reminder of how fragile life can be, even when we try our hardest. What really bothers me here is that, at the time of making this video, Raymond could possibly be walking the streets of Canada again in only 6 years' time. Which, considering all of the crimes he's committed, just completely baffles me. I mean, to be honest with you, I think this monster should quite literally rot in prison. Anyway, those are my thoughts, but out of curiosity, what are yours? As always, folks, please share your own opinions in the comments section down below. And I think that'll do it for now, folks, but as always, thank you so much for watching today, and I'll see you again very shortly for another video. Until that moment arrives though, remember to look after each other, and of course, stay curious. Thank you, and goodbye.
That's sad. Where did that thing go? For a good video.
It was a crime so strange, cold and calculated that it united two nations in shock and despair. And with the suspect soaring to the top of Japan's most wanted list,
How are you doing?
he would deform his own face to keep his real identity hidden to the world. My name is Adrian, and welcome back to Coffee House Crime. Today we're looking at the case of Tatsuya Ichihashi and his victim, Lindsay Hawker. There are many strange and disturbing details to this case, including a body in a flower pot, plastic surgery to avoid detection, and a wild hunt for a suspect that would take police years across the entire nation of Japan to capture. So pull up a seat, grab a coffee and sit back. This is the case of Tatsuya Ichihashi. Although our story today takes us to Japan, we're starting it in England, in a city called Coventry. Coventry is located deep in the Midlands of England. Known for its medieval cathedral and, sadly, also for its destruction during World War II, Coventry has bounced back in the last few decades to become an engineering powerhouse to the United Kingdom. With easy access to both London and Birmingham, and most of the country less than a 2-hour drive away, it's a well-situated city with a lot to offer to its residents. And one of those residents was Lindsay Hawker. Lindsay was born on December 30th, 1984, to her father Bill and mother Julia Hawker. She was a happy child growing up and had 2 sisters named Louise and Lisa. She was schooled at King Henry VIII School, and at the end of college she ventured to the University of Leeds to study biology. She met university with academic success too, and in 2006 she achieved a first-class honours grade. Being both very serious about her future career while also being popular among her friends, Lindsay had a lot going for her. She was bright, nurturing, caring, and successful. But she also had an appetite to try something new before pursuing her master's degree, and so in mid-2006, she hatched up a plan. Lindsay decided to take a year out of a busy schedule to do a bit of travelling while she worked. She figured that a year out of education would bring a new perspective to her life. And so in October 2006, she signed up to Nova Teaching School and found herself on a plane to Japan. She had signed up to Nova, Japan's largest private English school, which recruits adults from around the world to teach the language in both Osaka and Tokyo. Nova is considered to be a prestigious assignment, and Lindsay was one of the lucky few who managed to grab a spot. After touching down in Tokyo, Lindsay was finally assigned to Koiwa, a district in the Edogawa ward of Tokyo, and she would quickly find both comfort and excitement in her surroundings. Located only 17 minutes away from Akihabara and 22 minutes away from Asakusa, there's a plethora of sights, activities and fun things to do near Koiwa. Whether you're there for food, parks, shopping, temples, or just a good drink, Tokyo has it all. She had found herself in one of the most interesting cities that the world has to offer, and she was loving it. She decided to move a little further east from Tokyo's centre to a place called Chiba. Here, the rent was cheaper. She also moved in with 2 other teachers, both of them also working at Nova School, and very quickly, the 3 would become friends. And soon after, Lindsay's time in Tokyo started to fly by. Although she was loving her time away from home, Lindsay often still thought about home. She had a loving family, a large group of friends, and a boyfriend back in England. And so with that said, the homebird often kept in contact through Facebook, Skype, text, and phone call. It was 6 months into her stay in Tokyo in March 2007 that Lindsay had an awkward encounter. She had finished work for the day and travelled back to Chiba Station before collecting her bike. As she was unlocking her bike, a man approached her from behind. When she turned around, the man greeted her by saying, "You are my English teacher." Lindsay was confused by the situation. She was sure that he was not one of her students. She awkwardly declined to comment, but the man continued following her. She jumped on her bike and began to cycle away, but still the man followed her. She sped up. His walking turned into jogging, and then his jogging into running. And with Chiba's many roads and intersecting walkways, it was almost impossible for Lindsay to escape him. He continued to strike conversation, asking Lindsay where she was from and where she studied. She still tried to shake him off though. She eventually reached her apartment, and this is where she stopped her bike. The man was known as Tatsuya Ichihashi, and he had been running after Lindsay for the entire duration back home. When he finally caught up with her, he had a proposal to make. And despite his strange performance, the offer was simple and innocent enough. Tatsuya asked Lindsay if she would be interested in providing him English lessons. He felt like he needed a little bit of help with the language. They could meet in a cafe and he'd pay her generously by the hour. Lindsay politely refused. Her work schedule was busy enough, and the time she did have off was on her own terms, having fun. Tatsuya was disappointed, but he did seem to accept her answer. It was here though that he asked her one final strange question. He was thirsty after pretty much chasing Lindsay throughout the streets of Chiba. He asked her if she'd politely provide him a glass of water in her apartment. Lindsay was hesitant, but reluctantly she did allow him into the apartment. Sure, he was a strange man, and he did make her feel uncomfortable, but she had 2 roommates. This was a good opportunity to indirectly show the man that she did have company at all times, and it was an opportunity for her friends to see his face, should it ever come up again in the future. They entered the apartment together, and it was inside her apartment while having his drink that he made the offer again. It came with a price tag this time. He'd pay Lindsay 3,500 yen or $32 an hour, and the interaction would be strictly business. This was an offer Lindsay couldn't refuse. Although Nova was helping her get by in Tokyo, she could do with some extra cash, and this was easy money. She agreed to his request, deciding to meet him at a coffee shop a few days later. Tatsuya was appreciative, and he thanked Lindsay for the offer. Before he'd leave her apartment though, he wanted to give her one last thing. He whipped out a pen from his back pocket and grabbed some scrap paper, and then he started scribbling something. A few moments later, he handed her the note. It was a sketch he had just drawn. One of Lindsay. And along the sketch was his name and his phone number. Tatsuya Ichihashi was a 28-year-old man from the city of Ichikawa, also located in Chiba Prefecture. He was born in Gifu Prefecture on the 5th of January 1979, and initially grew up there before moving to Chiba. He was born into a successful family. His father was a medical doctor at a local hospital in Chiba, while his mother was also a professional dentist. In his younger years, Tatsuya had ambitions to follow his father's footsteps in becoming a medical doctor. But when he failed his exams and was denied in advancing his studies, he settled for a degree from the Department of Horticulture. He graduated from Chiba University in 2005, and although he passed his degree relatively well, Tatsuya did not make effort to find any work. Instead, he lived on an allowance of 100,000 yen or $920 a month from his parents. And this is where we learn a little more about the dark half of Tatsuya Ichihashi. Tatsuya had no previous convictions with the law, but he had been the subject of an allegation of prior theft and injury. Allegedly, he had assaulted a woman on the street during a robbery, but the matter had been settled out of court. It is alleged that his father paid the woman off with around 1 million yen or $10,000. He was also described as a loner with an obsession for physical fitness. Tatsuya regularly attended his local gym, and he often cycled over 25 kilometers every day. In addition to this, Tatsuya was known to be a little reclusive, rebellious, and had no intention to find any work. And with only $900 a month to get by, were weekly sessions at $35 an hour really that sustainable? Back to Lindsay's apartment though. After handing her the sketch with his name and his number, Tatsuya thanked Lindsay for her time and the glass of water. He wished her well, until they'd meet a few days later. Fast forward several days, and it is now Saturday the 24th of March 2007. Lindsay had contacted Tatsuya a couple days prior, and they'd arranged for their first English lesson in a local coffee shop. CCTV captured the two conversing while in the queue to grab a drink. Lindsay seemed relatively relaxed, but she did make clear steps backwards whenever Tatsuya moved too close. The pair sat and spoke for what is assumed to be a little over an hour, and progress was good. At the end of it though, Tatsuya awkwardly pointed out that he'd forgotten his money. "No worries," he said, "I only live half a mile down the road. Why don't you come by and grab your money and then be on your way?" Lindsay agreed, and so the two hopped into a taxi. Lindsay hadn't brought a bike with her that day, and she also had work later on in the afternoon. So when she arrived at Tatsuya's, she asked the taxi driver if he'd be so kind to wait for her. He agreed, and so Lindsay followed Tatsuya into his apartment. Several minutes later though, Lindsay still hadn't returned. That's a little strange, the taxi driver thought, but maybe she's had a change of plans. No worries, and so on that note, he left, completely forgetting about the incident. Lindsay failed to show up to work late that afternoon, however. And even worse, she never made it back to her apartment either. Her housemates, already noting that she wasn't at work that day, started to worry about Lindsay. They called the police later that night to report her missing. But Saturday turned into Sunday, and Sunday turned into Monday. The family and friends of Lindsay back home in the United Kingdom were already starting to grow worried over her radio silence. It was only after Monday, though, when she missed a second day of work, that panic really started to set in. The school contacted her parents to let them know that she had now missed 2 days in a row, and straight after that they contacted the police. It was only then, though, that the police started taking Lindsay's disappearance a little more seriously. Police search efforts started at Lindsay's home, and her housemates were the first to be interviewed. And with luck, they already had a suspect in mind. They knew that Lindsay went to see a man in a coffee shop shortly before she disappeared, and she'd also left his sketch back in the apartment. This was their first clue. It was around 5:40 p.m. that 2 officers were dispatched to Tatsuya's home, but after knocking on his door, no one answered it. His neighbours, though, were at home, and kindly they let officers peer over from the balcony and into Tatsuya's living room. There were no lights on in the property, but there did appear to be somebody lurking around inside. And weirdly enough, his detachable bathtub had been moved from the bathroom to the balcony. On a hunch, the 2 officers called for backup. They were worried that maybe Lindsay was inside being held hostage, and within the hour, 7 more officers arrived. 3 hours and 9 officers later, and police were getting ready to raid Tatsuya's home. It was then, in a surprise moment, that Tatsuya opened his front door, with a rucksack in bare feet. In that split moment of panic, Tatsuya stormed past police. They tried to grab him, but only managed to get his rucksack. Tatsuya himself slipped by. They didn't manage to keep up with Tatsuya either. With the building's hallways being so narrow and confusing, he managed to get by. And with police officers lacking any radio equipment, they lost all sight of the man. So, in the middle of Tokyo City, Tatsuya vanished into the night. It was as if the man had literally disappeared into thin air, because Tatsuya was nowhere to be found. Police officers investigating his property just moments later would be in for a gruesome scene. There they had found the naked body of Lindsay Hawker. She was found buried in Tatsuya's detachable bathtub, which he had moved himself to the balcony. The tub had been filled with a mixture of sand and soil, almost entirely covering Lindsay, with only her right hand emerging from the surface. She had been bound and gagged, with plastic ties and scarves, and bruises were present across her upper body. In her final hour, she had been subjected to an extended assault, her possessions still scattered across the room. Along with the body, sand and soil in the balcony bathtub, it also contained a decomposing agent to speed up the process of decomposition. And flower seeds were placed on top to disguise the bathtub as a flower bed. The seeds eventually would be feeding off Lindsay's body. To add to the harrowing discovery, it was also strangely noted that Tatsuya had shaved all of Lindsay's hair off of her head. Police would also discover several wigs in Tatsuya's apartment, alleging that perhaps he was a crossdresser. This quickly became public knowledge, and soon after, rumours even started circulating to suggest that maybe Tatsuya had killed Lindsay to wear her hair as a wig. By the next morning, Tatsuya Ichihashi was officially a wanted man across all of Japan. Police distributed wanted posters across the city. His face was shown across multiple news sites. Interviews given to anyone who may have potential information. And raids were witnessed at locations of possible sightings of the suspect. But despite all efforts, just like a ghost, Tatsuya was nowhere to be seen. Hardly any sightings of the man were reported over the following weeks. In fact, all of them turned into dead ends. Police were so keen to capture the suspect, though, that they decided to release photoshopped images of Tatsuya wearing wigs, just in case he was out in drag. But Tatsuya was good at remaining unnoticed. In fact, he was so good at evading the police that his disappearance turned from weeks into months into years. And this frustrated Lindsay's family, because in addition to the relentless pain that they had to experience from the loss of their daughter, was the feeling that a killer got away. It was not just that, but they also felt that Japanese police were growing lazy and sloppy in their investigations. It angered Lindsay's parents so much actually that, just months after her death, the two would travel to Japan and single-handedly assist in raising awareness of Lindsay's killer. Her father, Bill, even met members of the Japanese mafia, the Yakuza, in a bar, giving them 2 bottles of whiskey as a present before asking them for their help. And as time went on, Japanese police soon found themselves in the centre of the spotlight. How did 9 police officers let one man slip by? Why did they take a month to quiz vital witnesses? And did they know that their wanted poster had a picture 7 years out of date? Police and the Hawker family would slowly start to argue against each other, and soon British and Japanese media were involved too. And while all of this was happening, Tatsuya was still out there. He had actually travelled across most of Japan during his time on the run. Ranging from Aomori, one of the most northern cities on Japan's main island, right down to the southern island of Okinawa, Tatsuya had remained unnoticed. He even lived on a remote island in a concrete bunker at times to avoid detection too. A year after Lindsay's death in 2008, and right through 2009, Tatsuya found himself in Osaka. Located 250 miles west of Tokyo, Osaka is a large port city and a commercial centre to Honshu. It's known for its modern architecture, nightlife, and hearty street food. It was during this time that Tatsuya routinely lived in internet cafes and worked on construction sites to get by. With the money that he could save up, he would put that towards plastic surgery to change his appearance and avoid being caught by the law. However, he had actually already changed his appearance through self-mutilation ever since becoming wanted by the law. He'd cut off his moles, used scissors to cut off part of his lower lip, and eventually sewed a thread through his nose to alter its shape. By the summer of 2009, police were painfully desperate to find Tatsuya. It was here that the National Police Agency raised the cash reward for information leading to the arrest of him from 1 million to 10 million yen. They also released a new statement advising it was believed that Tatsuya had plastic surgery performed to his face to alter his appearance, and that people should be on the lookout for resemblances of Tatsuya's special identifications. And it worked, because in October 2009, a plastic surgeon located in Nagoya informed police that he believed that he had just worked on Tatsuya. Tatsuya had foolishly accepted to take a before and after picture of his operation. The same photos would be shared with police and eventually the world. This rattled Tatsuya. He knew that the newly released photos by police had blown his cover. In fact, it was so successful that one of his colleagues back at a construction site in Osaka recognized him. Tatsuya knew that he had to get out of Osaka and hide fast. His plan was as he had done before in several other close calls. Flee to Okinawa and take refuge in one of the abandoned concrete bunkers found across its many remote islands. On the 10th of November 2009, he discreetly fled to Osaka's ferry port. 3 days of keeping his head low on a slow ferry to Okinawa, and he would finally be in a much safer position away from justice.
I'm not gonna do shading
But
now,
before he could even reach the
now
boat,
I'm tired.
Tatsuya's
It's almost
luck
11.
would finally run out. A worker at the ferry port had actually recognized his face.
Yeah, I'm not gonna do shading. I'll save that for another day, but yeah, I guess there's kind of a thing. I don't know. Okay. Yeah, that's the end of YouTube. Bye.